What are you gonna do if ever you get out of this?
If I get out of this, I'll fucking kill every one of you.
Yeah, I thought so. Gemma?
Yeah.
Come on, drink it all. You won't feel a thing.
Everybody out!
The story begins with an older man named Norm, who leads a criminal organization. A meeting is held with his son-in-law and other members of the group. During the gathering, Norm announces that everyone must prepare for his departure because they have a large debt that needs to be settled. After the celebration ends, Norm and his associates leave quickly and head to a slaughterhouse. There, Norm talks with the owner, but he grows tense and frustrated when he learns that the factory has been struggling for a long time and still hasn't paid off the debt owed to his organization. Norm plans to take over the factory, but the owner refuses to sign the paperwork, even though he had promised to repay the debt. Bull, who is with Norm, becomes frustrated, realizing the owner is trying to manipulate the situation. Losing patience, Bull confronts the owner and, after a brief exchange, cuts off several of his fingers. This brutal action forces the owner to sign the papers handing over the factory. On the way back, Bull notices that Gary, the team member who had lent money to the owner, is missing and wonders where he is. Gary was supposed to help with the situation, but he and the rest of the team stayed silent when Bull asked questions. That evening, Bull saw Gary's car in his driveway. Curious, he went to investigate and was shocked to find Gary having an affair with his wife, Gemma. Bull's sudden arrival startled Gemma, and in panic she ran into their son's room without saying a word. Bull's heart shattered. He never imagined being betrayed by both his wife and his close friend. Out of respect for Norm, he chose to stay silent and keep Gemma's affair a secret, burying his pain deep inside. In the days that followed, Bull quietly endured his pain, focusing on raising and taking care of his son, Aiden. One day, Norm called Bull for a private conversation. During their talk, Norm said that Bull was the only person he fully trusted in the organization. But he also delivered painful news. Since Gemma chose to live with Gary, Bull had to part ways with her. Norm expressed his deep regret but was firm, telling Bull that he was no longer a member of the group. Bull confronted Gemma and Gary calmly but firmly, revealing that he had known about their affair for a long time. He explained that he stayed silent out of respect for Norm, the organization's crime boss. Bull said that if it weren't for his loyalty to Norm, he would have handled things differently. He announced that he was ready to leave the organization, but only if he could have custody of his son, Aiden. Norm, however, refused, saying Bull was not capable of taking care of the boy. Anger and disappointment surged through Bull as he walked away, his heart heavy with rage and hurt. The next day, Bull returned to his old house to pick up Aiden. Though he was always tough and unyielding with his enemies, he treated his son with special care. Soon after, his close friends Marco and Mike arrived with a message from Norm. They asked Bull and Aiden to join them on a trip to a nearby amusement park. At first, Bull refused, saying he wanted to cut all ties with the organization. But Marco persuaded him, explaining that the trip was just a farewell from Norm to Bull and Aiden. Touched by his friend's sincerity, Bull finally agreed to go. At the amusement park, Bull spent time enjoying rides and exploring with Aiden. Later, Norm asked Marco and Mike to take Aiden on another ride so he could speak to Bull privately. Once Aiden was out of sight, Norm suddenly pulled a weapon and led Bull to the parking lot where Gary was waiting. Furious and full of resentment, Bull called Gary a failure and harshly accused Gemma of being unfaithful and willing to betray any man. Norm, enraged by Bull's words, struck him with the weapon and ordered him locked in the trunk, clearly intent on punishing him for disrespecting his daughter. They took Bull to an abandoned bus in a remote area. Suddenly, Gemma appeared and angrily confronted him for trying to escape with Aiden. The argument grew heated, but eventually, Norm stepped forward and asked Bull a difficult question. If he were separated from Aiden, what would he do? With a cold expression and harsh tone, Bull replied that he would kill anyone responsible. His ruthless threat made Norm realize the danger. Not wanting to take a risk, Norm acted first. He ordered his men to pour gasoline on the bus, and then used a bottle of vodka to knock Bull unconscious, preparing to carry out his plan to kill him. They left Bull in the empty bus and set it on fire without hesitation. From a distance, Aiden crawled out of Gemma's car, screaming when he saw his father trapped in the flames. Panicked, Gemma pulled Aiden back into the car, abandoning Bull. A decade later, a familiar figure waited by a pickup truck. It was Bull, alive and back, burning with determination to take revenge on those who had betrayed him. With a carefully planned strategy, he made his first move. Stepping out of the vehicle, Bull coldly killed a former associate of Norm, beginning his relentless quest for vengeance. The scene moves to the house of Norm's eldest daughter, Gemma's sister. The wife is shocked when she turns on the lights and sees her husband tightly bound, his face full of fear. Her shock turns to panic when she sees Bull, whom she thought had been dead for years, standing before her. Bull coldly questions her about the whereabouts of Gemma and Norm, mentioning their old, now abandoned house. Trembling, she claims she doesn't know, saying they haven't spoken in 5 years. But Bull remains unforgiving, remembering that they had provided the bus where Norm and his men once tried to burn him alive. With ruthless determination, Bull kills both of them, continuing his relentless path of revenge. The next morning, an older Norm visits Gemma and Gary's new home for breakfast. He brings the grim news that Gemma's sister and her husband have been killed. Enraged, Gemma immediately suspects one of Norm's enemies. Norm firmly denies it, insisting he has no enemies left and suggesting the deaths may have been a failed robbery. Meanwhile, Bull continues his unrelenting quest for revenge. This time, Bull encountered a boy, the son of Marco, one of Norm's comrades whom Bull believed had betrayed him. He told the boy to go home and tell his father that Bull would be waiting for him at a nearby park. Hesitant at first, the boy obeyed and delivered the message. When Marco heard the name Bull, he was stunned. He initially denied his son's story, but anxiety soon set in. Without delay, he called Norm to report the situation and warn him about Bull, who was looking for him. Norm instructed Marco to meet Bull and confirm whether he was truly the man everyone thought had died in the fire years ago. Before leaving, Marco armed himself with a knife and told his wife to lock all doors and windows, forbidding anyone from leaving until he returned. When Marco arrived at the park, he was stunned to see Bull alive, something he had never expected. Overwhelmed, Marco bowed his head and apologized to Bull for his past betrayal, explaining that he had only been following Norm's orders. When Marco's wife grew worried about her husband, she received a call from his phone. Expecting his voice, she was shocked to hear Bull speaking instead. Panicked, she rushed to the park and the next morning found her husband's lifeless body. Marco's death led Norm and Gary to visit Bull's mother's house. His demise finally made them realize that Bull was still alive and preparing for an inevitable revenge against Norm. Norm confronted Bull's mother, demanding to know her son's whereabouts. Though vulnerable, she firmly said she didn't know, claiming Bull had disappeared 10 years ago. Norm pressed on, threatening to kill her if she didn't give information. Hours after Norm and Gary left, Bull returned to find his mother had been killed. Devastated, he became even more determined to pursue his revenge. His next target was Mike, one of Norm's accomplices. Mike had just picked up his 2 children from school and was walking them home when he saw Bull waiting in a parked car. In that moment, Mike felt as if he were facing a ghost. Everyone knew Mike, along with Norm and others, had been involved in the attempt on Bull's life years ago. Bull stepped out of the car, threatened Mike, and ordered him to get in, warning that refusal would cost him his life. As they drove, a terrified Mike begged for forgiveness, especially for the safety of his children. Bull, however, remained cold and demanded to know Gemma's current location, ordering Mike to share any information he had. Confused and unsure, Mike said he didn't know where Gemma was. He claimed he hadn't seen her in 3 years and suggested that Gary and Norm might have better information. Growing impatient, Bull gave Mike an ultimatum. If he could arrange for Gary to meet Bull at the fairground, Mike and his children would be safe. If not, Bull threatened to kill them. While a worried Mike tried to meet the demand, Bull and Mike's youngest child rode an amusement park ride, seemingly unaware of the fear and tension surrounding them. After some time, Mike told Bull that he had contacted Gary, who was with a waltz troupe. Bull spared Mike and let him and his children go. However, Bull continued his pursuit of Gary, and the two eventually faced each other in a tense encounter. Bull drew a knife, causing Gary to panic as he realized he was confronting the man he thought was dead. Bull forced Gary to play a video game while continuing his interrogation, repeatedly pressing him for the locations of Norm and Gemma. Gary lied, claiming he and Gemma had separated 6 years ago and that he didn't know where either of them was. Bull saw through the deception and left Gary badly injured. Although he still hadn't found Gemma and Norm, his determination didn't waver. Refusing to give up, Bull continued his search for the truth. One night, he entered a nightclub and discovered a drug trafficking operation. Remembering that Gemma had once struggled with severe drug addiction, Bull intercepted one of the couriers and forced him to reveal information about her whereabouts. Bull forced the courier to lead him, believing he might have crucial information about Gemma. Terrified, the courier eventually took him to one of the city's top drug dealers. Bull asked if Gemma was one of the dealer's clients. The dealer agreed to share the information for a price. Bull accepted but asked for a drink first. Losing patience, he suddenly drew a knife and cut off the dealer's hand, leaving him in intense pain. Bull brutally interrogated the dealer, forcing him to reveal more information. After losing his arm, the dealer finally agreed to take Bull to Gemma's house on the condition that his life be spared. Bull agreed and they went on their way. At Gemma's house, Bull found her asleep. He woke her loudly, startling her into panic. Shocked to see him, Gemma fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. Bull remained cold and ordered her to call Norm immediately, leaving her no choice. Moments later, Norm entered Gemma's house, weapon in hand, unaware that Bull was holding a knife and ready for him. In a tense confrontation, Bull quickly overpowered Norm. Once he was subdued, Bull pressed a pillow against Norm's neck while continuing to demand information from Gemma about Aiden's whereabouts. Gemma begged him to stop, but Bull remained unmoved, determined to get the answers he wanted. In a fit of rage, Bull shouted Aiden's name, causing Gemma to panic. Terrified, she finally revealed that Aiden, the child she had abandoned, was living under a downtown bridge. With his patience gone, Bull killed Gemma that night. The next morning, he went to the bridge and found Aiden. Taking the boy with him, Bull decided to bring him to a nearby church. At dawn, a deputy visited the church, searching for any sign of Bull. Deputy Cheryl was actually Bull's ex-mother-in-law, having divorced Norm before Aiden was born. When she opened the church door, she was shocked to see Aiden unconscious on the floor. The sight made her suspicious and filled her with fear. Cheryl had believed Bull had died 10 years ago, and his sudden return raised questions about his motives. Suspicious, she confronted him. Bull calmly explained that he had come not for himself, but to protect and redeem Aiden. Looking into Bull's dark eyes, Cheryl realized the terrifying truth. He had died 10 years ago when Norm and his men burned him alive on the bus. Yet he had returned, driven by revenge and a mission to protect Aiden. Before leaving, Bull entrusted Cheryl with the care of Aiden and thanked her for her help. With a cold, determined gaze, he walked away, leaving behind a story full of mystery and surprise.